Welcome everybody to Refresh Teaching. Normally I'm just somebody hiding behind a name or whatever with the mute on, but I stimulated this particular event today because I'm a real fan of oral exams. I started doing oral exams when I came to ETH 24 years ago and learned for some Meisters. I've done most of my oral exams in German, so that's always been a little bit of a challenge. And what I've seen as rector is that as the student numbers have increased, and as we've also been able to carry out online computer-based examinations, and also as the background of our professors at ETH has changed from being mainly Swiss when I first came here, with the foreigners mainly being from Germany, now we've become much, much more international. And I thought it would be really interesting to share some of the thoughts about oral examinations. And so Let very kindly found three speakers, and they kindly asked me to share my thoughts. And I noticed with interest that they're either very close to retirement, or both my colleagues are just retired, literally. And so I am concerned a little bit that this might have been perhaps a skill that might be disappearing at ETH. So I thought, well, let's talk about it, because it's one of those things that's much harder to write down and say this is actually how you should do it. So I'm going to share a little bit from my perspective to start off with, what I've done and how I've done it, and I'm sure we will all come together in a very nice way and be able to share with each other. Now I have to just set this up. Give me a moment while I just do that, make sure I've got the right one in the right screen, and I have the subtitles off. Okay, there we go. That looks good. Right, there we go. So yes, so the title was designed by Let.
Sarah, it's still presenter's view. We still see what you have on the right as your next slide.
Okay, thank you very much. Going to that one. How's that? Is that better?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Marvelous. So wonderful. So Let decided on the title Definitely Worth It, and I absolutely support that. So my hope is that this will stimulate a little bit of a discussion. And I sort of dug around into the internet and found a few pictures, because of course right from the very beginning people had been examining, doing critical thinking, arguing about what should be the right answer to various problems. And that was, I think, the original approach, perhaps up to medieval times. And then I was fascinated to find actually that Imperial China started doing written exams quite a long time ago as well. And you see a picture that I borrowed from the Beijing Palace Museum. And this was really because of the scale and because of the fairness, and because people had been preferring their own family, people coming from their town and whatever. So Imperial China was really a great leader in the beginning of the written exams. And of course, more recently, we've engaged in a large increase in the number of computer-based online exams to try and be authentic. And I thought it might be quite interesting to have a look at the taxonomy of educational objectives. This is, I think, the next generation of what I knew as Bloom's. And what one starts off at the very lowest level here of remembering, which you can deal with a bit with multiple choice or effectively parrot learning, which is really not what we want to do, to really confirming understanding, being able to apply it, and then going on to the much higher level of analyzing, evaluating, and creating that we tend to sort of get at a little bit by our projects and our thesis. And I think when you see where oral exams could be placed alongside the written exams and the online computer-based exams, again, this is a rough allocation, you can see why we shouldn't lose the skills to offer oral examinations. And there's really a very good niche for oral examinations to fill in judging learning. And I'm going to, just from my own experience, a little bit share how we could conduct oral examinations, where they might fit into the portfolio, and when we should use this approach. And these are just some of my written printed teaching resources from my time as a as a professor on top of our blended learning platforms, Caliche initially, and then Geotip afterwards. And starting sort of in the middle, when we were in the 4 diplôme, we had the first 4 diplôme, we did written examinations, and then in the second 4 diplôme, we were already doing oral exams. It's really quite interesting. We put three classes together, and the students would be examined by 2 of the professors. And it was very early on, when my German was not good when I first came. I really was very, very poor. So I had to do a lot of preparation, a lot of work, and much different from examinations later on. But even so, in civil engineering, both the course here on the left and on the right, these were still taught in German, because civil engineering masters was taught in German up until the time I left to become rector. So you can see there was quite a lot of time, 2 different ways of doing it. The co-examiner here, Rudi Röger, with 3 per hour, and then latterly I examined also with Ralph Herzog, and we had 1 per hour, and I probably did 2/3 of them, and here we often split 1 for 1. So that was a little bit the background. And I think the roles of the professors and the assistants in preparing for the exams and during the exams is worth thinking about. Are they, in terms of these 4 different things, teacher, examiner, authority, and coach? And I sort of see the assistants a little bit more in the coaching role, although as professor, I know I flipped across into coaching a little bit as well. And one in the examination, it's very interesting when you have 2 people in there. How do you share the load, and what role do both of the people play in that? And it's not like the detective story, good cop, bad cop, but a little bit that you can get more out of the students sometimes when one person is in the lead, is the main examiner, and the other person is allowed at the end to ask a supplementary question to help the students show their learning, and also to provide a little bit of quality control. So in advance, in the very old days, I used to write everything out in German, and latterly I'll show you what I did. The assistants were extremely helpful. You can see from the timings there, we had 2-hour slots and lots of coffee to keep us going. And they focused very hard in that 2 hours. They had to write a lot, they had to concentrate, and they also gave a lot of feedback at the end in terms of the marking. And because of this, it was usually about 2 weeks needed. So it was quite a lot of effort. But actually, I really, really enjoyed my oral examinations. I really enjoyed the fencing with the students, and especially the very, very good students. So I used to start, we had all of these sheets. You can see there are 92 sheets there for all of the students, and implying that probably there were 46 students in this row of exams. And I would write down prepare my sketch, so I knew exactly which student was getting which problem. You can see a bridge abutment here that had to be constructed on soft clay, etc., with piles and abutment and whatever. And I would put the sketch on the whiteboard. I would draw it myself. Sometimes I would put up a drawing, but that would have been a bit better than this little sketch here, or a photograph. And one would start off with an opening gambit to try and ease the nerves of the students and help them to get started. And then the assistant would be working hard in writing down my questions, what the examinee would answer, and then making their initial comment on what they thought, whether they thought the answer was right. I thought that was really interesting, actually. That was an innovation that they decided on themselves, and you can see Rudi Röger is there as the quality control at the end. And this is an example from another student where you can see again quite an extensive record of what questions I had asked, the answers, the questions, and again, the red one, the red square shows where the assistant had written in red where something was missing, where I had to add something in because they hadn't perhaps done something right. This was to do with piled foundations. And again, comments, a tick would be a very good answer or an absolutely appropriate answer. The okay was a bit, yes, no, a little bit so, and the wavy lines meant that I had to go and dig quite a lot, and I had to come back and answer. That meant probably 4 different questions in order to get an answer. And I've written down there here a bit backward, but in the end it was quite a good answer for this student. So trying to understand a little bit how we give the marks in terms of achieving quality, how we judge the performance of the student. And you saw 20 minutes per student when you need probably at the end 2 minutes to really review. You don't have very much time. So you make your opening gambit, they give you an answer. Is it sort of satisfactory? Do you need a supplementary question? Is it unsatisfactory? How do you go again? And there were some cases where I would ask questions and the answers got worse and worse. And you're thinking, oh dear, this is really quite difficult to find what the student knows. So in a sense, I then quite often go from a completely different approach, and then I would use what you can see here with this nice picture of the doggy waiting, and then I would come back towards the end of the examination and try and see if I could dig out really the answer to that question that I was seeking at the very beginning. The book by Malcolm Gladwell is really interesting. It's called About Thin Slicing. It's about how people make decisions extremely quickly. And he gives wonderful examples. I do recommend the book. One of them is of a coach who could look at somebody making a second serve in tennis. And from the moment that the person had hit the ball, they could get over 95% right as to whether the ball would go into the court. And that is the process of expertise, deliberate practice, and really understanding the subject and being able to judge whether something is right or not. And when I read the book, that's exactly what I do in my oral examinations. And you could argue, if you went back if you're a fan of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, that actually you don't need to mark anything because everybody should instantly know what quality is. But of course, at the end of the day, we're a university, we have to give our students marks. They need it. That's part of the general understanding of what you do when you come to university. You learn, you develop, and part of the culture is that we give them a mark. We at ETH don't have a rank list at the end, but even so, that's an important part of it. So there's 3 books that are quite interesting for future learning, and it's quite difficult to really work out what's going on and put it in a quantity. You can see on the left hand side I've put some marks. I've put in the opening gambit. I put in the sort of students that have got a good to very good first response in the green, sort of a bit in the middle, solid, and then down at the bottom marginal to a little bit in danger. So you could have your sort of middle student and you keep asking questions and they go up and they go down and they sort of end up in the middle. You could have somebody who's doing really pretty well, has been strong all the way through. And I was always a bit tough on giving 6s. And I would only give a 6 at the end if I really felt that the student had been able to show me that they had not only amazing conceptual understanding, but they were also able to think beyond some of the things that I had taught them. So I'd ask them a slightly tough question to see if they could think around it and come up with the answer. And then we had some who started very well and decayed a little bit. And then you would have some who were a bit on the line. And one for me was, what do you do? When do you fail a student? And I had a very, very clear, I would give them lots of different chances with all of the questions, and probably you would have to ask more questions because less came back to you. And at the end of the day, my judgment, especially in design and construction and civil engineering, was, would I drive over the bridge? The bridge that this student had designed the foundations for, and if not, I'm very sorry, they have to learn and come back again. It's not so easy to do it in all subjects. And I did have one very interesting case where a student fainted on me, she hadn't had any breakfast, and fortunately we had water in the room, and we had some food, and we sat her down, and we were able to extend into one of the breaks to be able to give her the chance to do the examination. She wanted to carry on. and she did, and she passed it. She passed it quite well, and in fact later came back to me for her master's project and went off to Stanford to do it, and did very well there. So there are some kind of interesting things that sometimes happen. So anyway, just here is that example of the 3 sheets I showed you before. The mark that the student was awarded in the end. How did we do that? At the end of the exam, the lead examiner would ask the others what mark they had in their mind. And the assessments were always very interesting as well. And usually the 3 of us would all be within 0.25 of a mark. And if we were not sure, we would go back and we would look at those 3 pages. We would look very quickly at where the student had not been able to answer something. And at the end, we would make the award. And then at the end of the day, we would cross-check examples in the higher level, 5.5 to 6, 4.75 to 5.25, and around about 4 for comparability. And then again, at the end of the exam period, we would do that. We would do that again. So that, in a nutshell, is a little bit of a story about how I've engaged in oral exams, what I've learned from it, and what I've been thinking about as I've been trying to do them. And I think quality is really important. I absolutely love the opportunity to probe and to find out about the student learning. That also fed back to me as a lecturer myself to improve my teaching. And I'm absolutely convinced that there is value in oral examinations, but of course that's up to you to decide. Thank you very much, everybody, and I will now hand over back to Refresh Teaching.